Hello everyone and welcome. I'd like to welcome you to the second of our workshop on Wednesday from the Castlebar Chamber of Commerce, and today's theory is on HR. So I just want to get, I suppose, an outlook on HR as we get back to business. Some of us already back in business, and the problems that may arise and the problems that are arising at the moment that we can deal with. As we go along, we want you to go into the chat box and just say a quick hello with your name and the name of your business, so we can chat in the chat box rather than over the microphone. And at the end, I've asked Anne Conlon from All About Sales to, if there's any questions, we're going to field the questions to our speakers. We're going to try and keep this under an hour, as we know we're all very busy and it's tough times for business, so we want to help as much as possible and just let businesses know that there is help out there in all forms, but you have to look for it and just ask. If you are at the chamber, there's great services like the ETB, the GMIT, Leo, so it's just to find out what's there, and hopefully by this workshop we can help with some of the services that are out there. Today's speakers is, first of all, we're going to have Clodagh Geraghty from GMIT, and then we're going to have Martin Cosgrove, HR Manager with Baxter, Castlebar, or Ireland. And finally, Geraldine O'Hare is from the Mayo, Sligo, Leitrim, ETB, just to give us a brief outline of what courses they're running for businesses that might help businesses in this time. So I hope everyone can hear. If you want to start putting your names and the business name in the chat room, and if you have any problems as we go along, you can just put it in the chat room, and Anne Conlon is going to keep an eye on that first. And after every speaker, she's just going to give a quick hello to any businesses that have mentioned in the chat room. So I'm going to start off with Clodagh Geraghty. And Clodagh, thank you very much for agreeing to this. So I'm going to let you fire ahead there when you're ready, please.
Thank you, John. I'm just going to share my screen here.
Okay.
Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, that's great. Well, first of all, thank you very much to Anne and John for inviting me to contribute to this afternoon's session. So what I was asked to look at is some of the HR considerations in returning to work. And the reality is, for most HR considerations, there are also employment law considerations. So I'll refer to some of the probably main employment law issues that are likely to come up over the next days and weeks. So I thought I'd start with, if you bear with me, with this. It's a screenshot of a tweet from Fergal Bowers. Now, I've been following Fergal Bowers for years on social media because he's a health correspondent. And Fergal doesn't get, he's not a huge following. He's no Tony Connolly or Sarah McInerney or any of those high-profile journalists. But this one stuck with me, that, when he records here that the news is changing faster than he can type it, and the public have never been more in need of key facts at this particular time. So it was around about this time that I guess all of you were trying to make decisions very hastily in the best interest of your business and in the best interest of your employees. It was also at this time that I was working with my brother. He has a small business in Galway. He employs 28 people. And it reminded me that we were making plans to lay off people. We were making plans to put people on short time. And then things sort of steadied up when the wage subsidy came into place, and that was what worked for him. But it was an example to me that, not only was the news changing faster than it could be typed, but the possible HR procedures that you could use were changing faster than we could anticipate it. So I was looking at documents that might have been 3 or 4 days old and checking to see were they still up to date. So it was in this frenzied context that people like yourselves made decisions about how your business might survive and hopefully eventually thrive. And I always say this, that employers and small business owners are my heroes because of the level of risk and responsibility that they adopt in the interest of being part of our economic community in the locality. So that's my context for what we're looking at. So we are now probably all familiar with the return to work safety protocol. No doubt you have it printed off and it's beside the bed and it's well thumbed with little stickies all over it. In any event, what you need to consider, first of all, is that the protocol, it's described as being mandatory, but it isn't law in itself. What it is, the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act 2005 is the law which, if you like, frames the protocol. So it's described as mandatory, but it isn't law in itself. Now, one of the things that I've highlighted there, it should be to the right of your screen, is the document places really strong emphasis on strong communication, shared communication, negotiation with employers and with employees. So if you like, that is the theme of my presentation, that the overriding HR advice is to maintain good lines of communication with your staff as they return to work. Now, one of the most, in a sense, there's three things we have to keep in our head at this point, is that the protocol should inform your own plan or your own protocol. The second thing that we have to keep in mind is that we need our employees to fill up the forms before they return to work, and we really need to renew these every 2 weeks or thereabouts. And the third thing to remember is that we have to conduct induction training. So if we were to pull three themes from the protocol, it is have your own protocol, have your own training plan, and have your forms in place. Now, to pick up the thread from last week, Mairead and Lorraine pointed us to standard forms that we can use. Mairead pointed us in the direction of the Health and Safety Authority, and I have a screenshot there on the bottom right of your screen of the Health and Safety template form for return to work. Lorraine put us onto a really good website called JotForm, where there are dozens of pre-made forms that you could use for any element of your business, customer feedback, etc. And they too have a pro forma form for returning to work. So there were two, just to pick up the thread from last week about where we can get the forms. Now, practical measures to minimize risk. This is a direct extract from the protocol. And whenever I'm reading a protocol or any instruction or legislation, I'm always tuned into two words: employers must or employers shall. So here we have employers must. So these aren't options, this is obligatory. They must provide induction training. So we have to have a plan for our training, which provides up-to-date advice. With an employee, you might see in my notes I have EE for employee, when they develop symptoms, the workplace organization, your response plan if somebody is demonstrating or is displaying symptoms, and sector-specific advice. So whether you're in hotel and catering or whether you're in retail. And to putting in place controls identified in your risk assessment, which you will have updated, and implementing temperature testing in line with public health advice. Now, dealing with the suspect case, again, direct extract from the protocol, but one of the reasons I'm emphasizing this is, if I could bring your attention, if you like, to the third point there on the slide, identify a designated isolation area, preferably behind a closed door. Take into account that you could at any one time have more than one person displaying symptoms. So you bring them to this isolated area, you give them a mask, you call their doctor, and you arrange for transport home if necessary. Now, one of the things that I think is really important to integrate into your own protocol is that employees know that if they complain that they have symptoms or they're not feeling well, they will be brought to an isolation area, and they would contact their GP, maybe arrange for transport to bring them home. So that an employee isn't landed with that, if you like, unusual set of circumstances in advance. So in your protocol and in your induction, make it clear that if somebody becomes symptomatic, this is what will happen. You'll also see there in the second bullet point, the protocol says to appoint a manager who will be the person responsible for suspected cases. So in terms of, just to remember at this point, remember your return to work form, the protocol which will inform your own protocol, and have your induction training. So in terms of reaching compliance, if we have those three things in place, we're well on the road to compliance. So the next thing I thought I'd look at is some of the, if you like, practical employment law issues that arise here, and that there are now particular nuances to in a post-COVID environment. And they are annual leave and sick leave, layoffs, redundancies, and if we have to make changes to the contract of employment. So annual leave is covered under the Organisation of Working Time Act 1997. And the Act says that the employer is entitled to determine when somebody takes their annual leave. So that being the case, can you specify that employees would take their annual leave now, or if they're still, if your business isn't open, and that way then you can get down to business when you are open? Well, the answer to this is yes, but the Act is quite clear that while the employer can specify when you take your annual leave, the employer has to take into account the need for rest and recuperation and for people to have time with their families. The general advice is it's probably wise to encourage people to take some leave now, but not at all. So we'd have to factor in that people will probably want to take some when restrictions are eased and people have more access to hotels and holidays, etc. Now, an entitlement to annual leave arises under the Act on the basis of hours worked. So if a person is on temporary layoff, they are not during layoff acquiring the rights to annual leave. Now, just to put in a caveat at that, if somebody comes back from a period of layoff and then acquires 1,365 hours in the year, they could still build up a full bank of annual leave, but they're technically not accruing it while they're on a layoff. Now, if there's questions about that, we can come to them at the end. Now, similar principle, if you had somebody on the wage subsidy scheme, in other words, you did what what was maybe encouraged to maintain the link, but you didn't have work for them. So they are technically at home on the wage subsidy scheme. They are not accruing an entitlement to annual leave while on the wage subsidy scheme, but technically laid off. So again, we can talk about that later. These are kind of nuances that we hadn't come up with before. Now, sick leave. The protocol advises revise your sick leave policy. If you have to make changes in light of controlling COVID-19, you should do so in negotiation with your staff or with the trade unions if you recognize trade unions. But again, the thread of if you need to change your sick leave policy, make sure you do so with the agreement and negotiation of your employees. Now, an employee can, of course, accumulate annual leave while on sick leave if it's certified sick leave. So technically, if somebody was on sick leave for an entire year, they would nonetheless acquire their full entitlement to leave. Now, of course, in terms of claiming illness benefit from the Department of Social, Community and Family Affairs, there's no longer a 6-day waiting period. There's an automatic entitlement, and the illness benefit matches the pandemic unemployment payment at a figure of $350 per week. So it's paid for a maximum of 2 weeks where the employee is self-isolating, and for a maximum of 10 weeks at that rate where the employee has been diagnosed. Now, to the question of layoffs, and the rule always with layoffs was and has been that a layoff arises when an employer is unable to provide work and believes that this is a temporary situation, gives the employee notice of the layoff, and during the layoff, the employee remains an employee even if they're not being paid, and the relevant form there is the RP9. Now, one of the issues around the layoff that people were concerned as we were making decisions early on in the pandemic around layoffs, The fear was that if we laid off, the employee would be able to trigger redundancy within 6 weeks. So employers like yourselves and other people in the community, we were on the horns of a dilemma. If we lay off and they trigger redundancy, then that was going to plunge the business into an insolvency situation. So again, the unique situation here is that employees who are laid off cannot trigger the redundancy after 6 weeks, and now that has been extended until August. So we're in a safe layoff zone in that period until the 10th of August. I'm quoting here from Regina Doherty. If we did not extend that end date further, redundancies could occur in the very near future. This would burden employers with further debt and a serious impact on the economy. So that was on that basis that they've made the decision to extend it until the 10th. Now, interestingly, while the employee can't trigger redundancies, the employer can trigger redundancies. And probably the most newsworthy case during the pandemic has been the redundancies in Debenhams. And here I have some details about the redundancy payments. Now, the redundancy or the workers in Debenhams, they're currently protesting. They have a picket, and what they're seeking is 2 weeks pay plus the statutory minimums. That would be 2 + 2. I wish them the very best, but I'm not sure they'll be successful in that regard. Now, very quickly, and I'm conscious of time because I'm fear I'm going over, what about the employee who refuses to go to work out of fear and anxiety? And I know this is something that Martin's going to pick up. But I always say the employer should be the most reasonable man or woman in the room. So you do what you can to see if you can alleviate these fears. If an employee flat out refuses to say, I'm not going to work because I'm afraid, can we then bring that situation to a head with discipline? The answer technically is yes. The answer prudently is, we want to think about that one very carefully. Now, in particular, and I've just noticed there at the bottom of the slide, the HSE has outlined a list of those people who are very high risk or high risk. So if I'm high risk or I'm living with somebody who's high risk and I said I'm afraid to go back to work and I'm on that list, would be unwise for the employer to go into a disciplinary with the view to dismissal in those scenarios. Big issue in the last few days. What about if I can't go to work because I don't have the childcare? So my employer is starting up again and he or she is opening their business, but I have nobody to mind my children. What's going to happen to my pandemic unemployment payment or my subsidy? So speaking on Monday on the radio, Regina Doherty says, and I'm just quoting directly from the interview, until your arrangements are back up and running, and she means by that your childcare arrangements, whether that's a creche or indeed grandparents, she referenced, the poor Irish grandparents, and running, the state will continue to support you financially. There's certainly there's no appetite politically to penalise people who are unable to return to work for childcare considerations. Very conscious of the time and scooting through this. The temporary wage subsidy scheme, which has been extremely useful and has been a very significant uptake. What we'll see now is what they call the PUP, the pandemic unemployment payment will go down, but the wage subsidy scheme will go up. So people will come off one and very likely go on the other. Now, the point here is that if you're an employer, you can claim the wage subsidy scheme on the basis that you've lost a minimum of 25% of your turnover as a consequence of the pandemic, and you give that undertaking to the revenue. And here we have the rates, which are from the department's website. So far, there's 58,300 people benefiting from the wage subsidy. We'll certainly see that figure increase. How long it will go on for, I think if we go back there was a quote there on the second point, the economic recovery will be monitored and will reform a decision later. So August or later in the summer, and the need for further extensions and tapering beyond August will continue then. So and I'll conclude on this very final point. If you're going to change a contract, so if you're going to reduce my hours or you're going to reduce my pay, what are the rules on changing my contract? Well, the law says this: you can change my contract if I consent to it. You can change my contract if it's in my contract that changes can be made, or you could change it and not do either and see what might happen in the fullness of time. So what I would say is, in the last recession, where there have been changes to contract, particularly reductions in pay, where that unilateral reduction in pay has been made, if it's across the board for reasons of the continued economic viability of the business, it tends to be tolerated. So if you're reducing my pay and not anybody else's, very unlikely to be tolerated. If it's across the board for exceptional reasons, given the economic situation that it's likely to endure for some time, it's more likely that it wouldn't, that the Labour Court and others would find that that is reasonable. So I do apologise, that was a lightning trip through a lot of information, and I'm sure I've gone over on time, so I'll conclude on that point.
Thanks very much, Clodagh. Very interesting. As we can see, the laws are changing, I suppose, from day to day, week to week. So
Yes.
It is daunting, and myself as an employer, trying to keep on top of this. And we really have to, for the employees and for ourselves and the viability of our business. So it's very interesting. And we just need, as we said, you need to read the newspapers, watch the news, because it is changing on a day-to-day business.
Yeah.
And thanks very much, Clodagh. That was very, very interesting, I have to say.
I'm happy to do that.
I'm going to introduce you now to Martin Cosgrove. He's the HR manager of Baxter, and we all know Baxter is a very good employer in the town of Castlebar, and we're very lucky to have such an established company in Castlebar. Baxter has been working the whole way through this, and I take it they've been very busy. So I suppose from Martin's point of view, he's been working with it and has seen these changes from day to day. So he's just going to give a brief practical outline of what's been happening in his company and maybe what's happening in the future. Martin, thanks very much again for doing this. I'll let you fire ahead there.
Not at all. I'm delighted. I'm delighted to be here. So I've about 10 slides total. So I'll go through them fairly quickly.
Perfect.
And I'm very open to questions as we finish. So in Baxter, I guess for us, we've been working through this from the outset. So we have remained at work. My slides are not moving for me. We've remained at work throughout. So we've two sites, Castlebar and Swinford, total of just touching on 1,300 employees now at the moment. 200 of those are what I would classify as office-based. With about 110 we discovered, I wouldn't have known this before St. Paddy's weekend, about 110 have what I would say remote possibilities that don't need to be in the workplace. About 1,100 are tied to operations, so manufacturing and the quality group. Both sites remained in operation throughout, so I'm coming from a context of not returning to work, I guess. We had to learn on the run, as it were, so we had no time for planning. We did have the advantage, I guess, of looking to some sister sites in Europe. So we have two sites in northern Italy, for example, who suffered really badly, and we did learn an amount from them. So we were about 3 weeks behind, I guess, so we did learn there. Now, in our line of work, we have seen a lift in product demand, two products in particular. So we've been extremely busy. We've hired, maybe temporary, yet to be told. That story is yet to be told. Maybe in Q4 here, the last 3 months, we're expecting to see a tail off maybe on product. We've had a big increase. We've hired somewhere in the region, I'd say, of 60 to 70 employees over the last 3 months. Two reasons: volume increase is one, and cover, because we didn't know in the middle of March. We didn't really know, as none of us did, what this was going to look like or how bad the impact was going to be. All we knew was the products we make, people in hospital beds were depending on them, so us not making just wasn't an option. So So we hired cover. We went out specifically and hired cover. Complicated to hire these days as well, actually, we've discovered that. So we're not coming from the point of view of layoffs or anything of that sort. That's our background. So the number of headings that we found has been very important for us over the last few months. So agility is the first one. We had to react with very little insight to this, and we had to react to changing guidelines. So almost on a weekly basis, the guidelines were changing from the state, and we were learning on the run. So what we did was we set up a core management group of about 7 people, 8 people to keep this all working. So the daily meetings, we would have hoped at this stage that would have petered out, but it doesn't. Shortened, but there's still daily 10 a.m. meetings of that group, mainly on Teams as opposed to in the room. Respond to either state guidelines as they change, now that has settled over time, or indeed corporate guidelines. Respond to employee concerns, and at the start, and still is, I guess, but there was great fear and concern palpable in here with employees in the workplace. So that's one of the things we had to respond to. We commenced a staged practical measures implementation, but that we're still making changes. That has been a gradual process, and I'll touch on what those look like. We had to understand and react to customer and supplier requirements. So our customers, for a period of time, it got quite unpredictable, and we found it difficult to decipher what was real customer demand and what was stockpiling in the marketplace. So that was something we had to react to. We set up listing mechanisms throughout the plants because we're across all shifts, pretty much 7 days a week, three shifts a day. We to make and adapt our policies, and I'll touch on that. We to interpret the cost implications, which are still to a large extent difficult to fully appreciate what it's going to do to our budget for the year, only that it's not helping. We to manage communications and change how we did that, and that basically has been the operating mode we've been in. Has eased off over the last 4 to 6 weeks, but was quite hectic at the outset, quite hectic. So again, I'm slow on transition of slides here, but it will come, I'm sure. We introduced a number of temporary policies. So we introduced a COVID case policy, what to do in the case of a suspected case, and we communicated that to all employees. Made plenty of mistakes in that because we have a lot of people, so but that communication or clarity, and I know you referred to it, Clodagh, that training orientation to people of what the requirements is very important. We introduced a temporary attendance policy for the duration of this. We altered our sick pay policy for the duration of COVID because I guess we were trying to encourage anyone that was symptomatic, close contact, travel, or an at-risk person to stay at home. And while at the same time, we were trying to encourage everybody else to come to work. So we built that into those policies. We had introduced remote working, thankfully, about 18 months ago, but that got extended extremely rapidly, I guess overnight. So we were lucky we had that policy in place. We've made alterations to that to enable about 110 employees to remote work. Myself being one of them, I work at home 2 days a week, and I'm in the office 3. Recruitment, we had to change recruitment because things like interviewing, medicals became quite complicated. So we had to change that. And indeed what we found was training of employees becomes quite complicated if you're trying to do it through a mask or through perspex and through from 2 meters away on some very specific tasks. So that's something we've struggled with a little bit. So we had to change our policies there. On the employee health and support side of things, we introduced full pay for those that we, I guess, wanted to stay at home. So for symptomatic or close contact employees who we were asking to remain out, we introduced full pay from day one to encourage that. And we made that very clear that basically we were going on trust for those employees, and we managed that on a case-by-case basis. That level just you may be interested, has leveled off a huge amount over the last few weeks. We've hardly got anybody at home in that situation at the moment. I think maybe 2 or 1,300. We introduced an at-work payment for people. So we did from the 15th of March to the end of May, not for every employee, for employees that were crucial to the manufacturing of products, we introduced payments based on each day they were at work for that period of time. So that ended at the end of May. It was a standard payment regardless of shift or salary, standard daily amount aligned corporately. So that was done across Baxter Corporation. We introduced remote working where feasible, not feasible for the majority because we were a manufacturing site. We altered our shift times. So we tried to stop the shift changeover where people meet on a daily basis. So we moved our shift start and finish times by maybe 10 minutes in some cases. And we also asked some people to move shifts. So instead of working a shift, they're now working, day shift, they're working evening shift to give us more flow and less congestion in-house. We did facilitate some leaves based on risk, very small number, but we did facilitate some leaves for people. We have an occupational health department, so we have a nurse pretty much that covers 6 days a week between 2 part-time nurses, and we have an assigned company doctor based in Westport who's on site for a couple of hours on a Tuesday. And we introduced a return to work protocol so that everyone understood very clearly the mechanisms of coming back to work to ensure it was safe. On the next slide, and I know I'm going at pace here now, but I'm conscious of time. One of the things we found to be crucial internally was the alignment and engagement of employees. So the only thing I've highlighted in yellow here is we were very anxious to introduce a culture of self-policing of good practices, be it wearing masks. We're all wearing masks in here now, unless you're in a closed office like I am at present. Hand washing, sanitizing the hands, all of that. We wanted that to become part of the culture. We work very hard to do that, and I think that's something I'd advise people to from day one to make it very clear that everyone needs to be aligned and engaged on it. We doubled down on normal communications. So we put up specific COVID boards outside our canteen, very large boards. We have specific plant manager updated newsletter, all things COVID, reaffirming what we want and why. We've engaged and aligned with unions, so we have about 950 maybe employees who were SIPTU members. Overall, I have to say SIPTU has been excellent, very helpful, very good with all of this. Encouraged two-way feedback from employees in real time so that we could get to what was happening. We did emphasize safety as our #1 priority, while at the same time, we, I guess, were very clear from the outset with employees that we really, really needed them to be in the workplace because patients in beds from Castlebar to Casablanca to California were lying in beds, and we just had to make product. So we were very clear with employees to say, you are required at work, and there may be consequences if you're not at work. So we didn't hide from that from the outset. And I think most people understand what we do, and that's a requirement. At the same time, we very much went out of our way to recognize that people were putting themselves in potentially in harm's way, especially back in March and April. No one really knew what was coming. So we use things like videos in our conference rooms, on televisions, plant manager thank you messages, photographs of employees in the workplace, things like that. And we've encouraged people to challenge any poor practices and recognize people that did, and recognize the progress of which we've had a huge amount in the last few months. So to give you an idea of the types of practical measures we've put in place. So it's a very, very changed environment in here since all of this began. So we have an emergency response team who will be trained on each shift for emergencies. So we kind of retrained in on what we required. So at our shift changeover times, so maybe from 8:15 in the morning to 8:15, from 4:45 to 4:15, 12 o'clock at night, those people will be on our doors. as people come in. So they'll do a temperature check. So they were handheld temperature monitors. We've now moved to automated cameras on the doors. Every employee has to apply hand sanitizer. They're given a mask, and we have to wear the mask for the day. We limited the access points to the plants, so we've pretty much limited to 3 doors now. We've introduced hand washing sinks where we would never have dreamt of having sinks before, and hand sanitizer departments. We've 4 sinks now introduced in our canteen, and everybody has to wash their hands before they queue up for the food. We've reduced the seating capacity in the canteen by probably 75%. Took out all of the big tables, put in single tables, specific traffic flow. We've shortened our breaks, altered the break times, altered our menu slightly, and we've reduced the use of cash. I think I've touched a fiver in the last 3 months. Other than that, it's all tap with the phone and with cards, and everybody has taken to that in here now. With very little shift overlap, so we don't see the other shifts. We've introduced one-way traffic management to the plant. Huge reduction on visitors in here and contractors, which has been problematic for us, especially the contractor side of it. We introduced a contact log, and that's one thing I would say that has been very, very beneficial to us. So every employee here has a simple log, and each day we have to log anyone that were within 2 meters for more than 15 minutes without a mask in place. And that has really highlighted our areas of risk continuously for us. That's something I would promote strongly for all of you. It's been a very useful, simple, but very useful tool. We've put remote working in teams. So for example, we have 2 employees in HR here who run payroll for all of Ireland. So we took decisions with people like that to say, you need to stop seeing each other in case one of you were to get COVID. So when one of them is in the office, the other one's at home. So we've done that throughout our organisation. So where there's key people, we've tried to separate them where we can. A lot of audit practices, lots of perspex. I think we've cleared County Mayo perspex in the last while. And we've linked everything we've tried to do to, again, engagement of employees so that people understand it may be different, it may be uncomfortable, but it's for our own good, so that everyone can buy in, or most people can buy in. Just on technology, I have a heading here on technology. Microsoft Teams, similar to Zoom here now that we're doing, has been a revelation for us. Even when this goes away, I think Teams is going to become a big way of doing business for internal communications, internal meetings. It really has enabled remote working for us. It's made it almost seamless, and actually I can see huge opportunity in training into the future via Teams. Huge opportunity within that into the future. WhatsApp groups for the social interaction, which is missing here in a big way. We have a corporate system, and we've used it a number of times, where I can send a message from the system and it'll hit the 1,300 mobile phones. So we've used that a few times to employees over long bank holiday weekends and things like that, to send out messages to people. Temperature checking, as I said, that has given great reassurance to employees. So that technology has been very, very good, very, very dependable. One of the things I guess all of this is re-emphasised is internet in the community. So even I know myself working from home, I've had coverage issues. So I think that's something that is crucial into the future for the region, which I guess we knew, but it has really brought it home for me. Learnings on laptops versus PCs. But I think in the future, when we're providing employees with PCs, we will be looking much more now to laptops. That's a learning for us. Great local support from some of yourselves on sourcing of equipment, from laptops to headsets to phones to perspex to stainless steel. All of those things have been great to be able to get things quickly. And again, in technology with internal communications, email, canteen screens. We've done surveys with employees. So simple things like Survey Monkey, which is very cheap, very simple. We've leveraged that a few times to get a feel for the ground truth out there a number of times. So that there's tools out there that can really help. The last slide you may be glad to hear is sort of learning. So what have we learned? Now I could write a much longer list than this, but I was conscious to try and put it on one slide for you. I guess the first and foremost is there's going to be serious cost implications. There is already for us. There will be for the remainder of the year. So we're trying to deal with that, understand it, and trying to account for it as best we can through other cost savings in the business, which we're going to have to find. Clarity on the requirements from your employees, and I guess for a lot of you, for your customers, is crucial. We've had to work hard at that, and that's very, very important. People fully understand what are we asking them to do. Clear two-way communications, because we need people telling us some of the requirements we put in place didn't make sense. So we needed people to tell us fairly quickly, and we needed to adapt. Agility has been one of the real buzzwords for me. We've had to do things here in the last 3 months that I couldn't have dreamt we would have been able to do last January, and we've managed to do them. On attendance of employees, we had a very slight decrease in attendance for probably 10 weeks max. And at the moment, I ran the attendance figures this morning for last week. We have a historically high attendance at the moment. I see higher attendance than I have seen in 10 years, which I think reflects the engagement and the goodwill of people to make this work in here. One of the real surprises and pleasant surprises for me. Recruitment and training has gotten very complicated because of the distancing, while still needing to show people how to complete very intricate roles. We're watching the employee holiday balance here. It's building because no one is taking holidays because there's nowhere to go. So again, it's not an urgent thing, but it's something we're watching because we have requirements to make sure everyone takes their 4 weeks before the year is over. As I said, Microsoft Teams and increased remote working, I think they're going to remain. This has really brought it forward. Masks, for those of you that will be wearing masks, they're not that pleasant to be wearing, but they're very valued by employees. I think they have really put people at ease. When we started temperature checking and wearing masks, it had a very valuable effect on the feeling of risk in here. We're in a much lonelier workplace, I will admit. I feel it myself. I come in the morning, put on the mask, come into the office. When I go to the canteen, I'm sitting on my own, possibly facing a wall. The interaction that was there before isn't there now. So that's something we're going to have to revisit. Contact log, I would really emphasize the benefits to you all. Again, I said it before, the employees are quite sensitive to risk, so that's something that needs to be watched. Ergonomics of remote working is a slight concern. It was done in a hurry, so some people a lot of people don't have the desks and benches at home they may have or would like. Employee engagement, if I touch on that, I see it now almost as an opportunity to unite or engage employees around the cause. So there's opportunity within there if you can manage to do it correctly. I've seen that here. And self-policing of those requirements is everything, especially maybe in a larger business. It starts to slip very quickly if there isn't a culture of washing hands, putting on the mask, temperature checking, and good practices. And the last message I'll give, again, I'm conscious of time, is it is problematic, but I guess we have seen it working. Our efficiencies are where they are miraculously. Our outputs are up. Our absence is down. We've managed with everyone's goodwill to really make this work, almost miraculously at times. But I guess I'll finish on that positive for you all, that there's a lot you can do at a time like this.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Martin. A lot of very interesting points there, I suppose, from a business point of view. Yes, Baxter is a big employer, but we can take a lot of them points, like the contract tracing, that we can bring down to our smaller businesses and learn from the likes of Baxter that obviously would excel in this. It's a very important employer in Castlebar, and we really appreciate, Martin, you taking time out to come on board. We will ask if anyone has any questions that they can just put in the chat room. I'm going to check in with Anne. She's just going to go through maybe people that have said hello. And if you've joined us late, just pop into the chat room and just say your name and who you're with. And afterwards, we will pop to Anne after our final speaker for questions. But Anne, if you just want to see who's on board at the moment.
Yeah, great. Thanks, me and John, and thanks, Clodagh and Martin. Some really great comments coming in to me privately. But just a shout out to Lisa O'Connor there. She's with us from Team Horizon. Anne King from First Choice Credit Union, Bernard Hughes from the Connacht Telegraph, and Eileen is from Cosmetic Creations. And just some comments, I suppose, John, if it's okay just to mention it there about the presentation. If people are finding it very interesting and practical, the information, and I have a few questions for you at the end. So I'll hand it back to yourself and let Geraldine also say hello. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And just want to say as well, all the speakers from this week and last week, this is our second week doing it, and we're doing it again next week. We will be putting all the presentations. So if you want the presentations to look at again, if you email the chamber@castlebar.ie, we will send the presentations out to you, and all our speakers have kindly agreed to share their presentations, which we thank very much. Final speaker for today is Geraldine O'Hare from the MSLETB, and they're very good. We're very lucky to have them in town. They have run some excellent courses, and again, courses that are appropriate at this time. So I'm going to hand you over to Geraldine. And Geraldine, thanks very much for joining us today.
No problem at all, John. I'm delighted to be asked to join you. Look, in the current environment, you know, things are difficult for all businesses across the board, no matter what size. And as I said, we were hit with this virus unawares there, you know, from the middle of March when everything went into lockdown, and it has been you know, a very hard and serious period of adjustment for everybody across the board. And you know, the two previous speakers have dealt very much with in terms of the, you know, the changes for business and all the protocols that have been put in place, recommended by the state in terms of guidelines for returning to work, and that's, you know, that's all very important. MSLETB, I suppose, across the board, you know, offers a lot of training both through our further ed centres, you know, the one in Castlebar there at the end of Main Street or Lucan Street, and then, as I said, we have the training centres as well in Ballina, and we have a Sligo training centre. I suppose, John, we've had to be very innovative in terms of looking at training, because we were caught a bit unawares in terms of, you know, how we could deliver training going forward. The model of remote learning and a bit of blended learning, which is going to be the model for the future, definitely, you know, will involve a lot more online delivery, and in terms of using Microsoft Teams and that sort of thing, it will definitely be an emphasis going forward. But I suppose in terms of what we have delivered recently and what is relevant in the current environment, we did link up a little bit with the Chamber there in Castlebar in the earlier weeks since the middle of March, and from talking to Elaine, and we saw the pressure points for businesses and the type of courses that would be useful. We ran a number of webinars there with the help of one of our contracted training providers. The first one was titled Return to Work, the New Normal, and it would have covered a lot of the stuff there, you know, that was dealt with already, you know, with, sorry, now the lady from GMIT, the name, Clodagh, sorry, that Clodagh had actually covered. So a lot of that was similar to the content that you delivered, and very well delivered there in terms of the protocols, you know, that would have to be put in place for people returning, and all the things Martin talked about as well in terms of when staff come back and the temperature testing and all that type of thing that, you know, that is being put in place, the actual protocols for all businesses across the board. So, you know, some of the businesses that logged on to that found it useful. So there was a week of that for the return to normal, and it you know, followed on from talking about that type of stuff to maybe looking at helping companies revisit in terms of redrafting safety statements, things like that, that they need to plan for going forward. Following on from the first webinar, the next area that was highlighted by Elaine and would have come through from some business people I've spoken to is the whole area of finance, you know, in terms of small businesses being struggling in terms of cash flow, wondering how they were going to cope when they returned, you know, in terms of having funding to continue and, you know, to move forward down the road. So look at, you know, budgeting and cash flow planning was an area that was delivered as well, and that's very important. And obviously, Elaine already highlighted to the businesses all the supports and the bits of funding that are available there through local enterprise office. And for me, one thing I suppose that really stems from this pandemic at the moment, John, and I've seen it here on the ground, I've seen it with some of the little businesses on my doorstep here. Ballinrobe is just in the road from me here, and I've seen the little boutiques that have taken to Facebook advertising their products, you know, when their shops were closed. One lady here in Ballinrobe, Deirdre Biggins, is absolutely mighty. She's there, she's modelling all her outfits every day of the week, has them up on Facebook and taking orders, you know. So I've seen how businesses have mobilized themselves, developed skills, you know, that they wouldn't have thought was possible before, presented themselves in a new way to their customers, looked at a new way of doing business going forward. And I would wholeheartedly applaud and support that. And to be honest, I'm pushing in terms of, we are looking currently at possibly an 8-week course that is being rolled out in another jurisdiction in terms of managing social media, you know, how to help businesses put themselves up there online and promote their wares and relate, you know, and connect with their customers. That's fairly important. But down the road, we would be looking at more e-commerce types courses. And I do want companies to get support in terms of designing their websites, you know, getting all that up to date and the supports that go with that going forward. I know Elaine has probably talked about, there is a grant that's available for companies in terms of, you know, setting up their websites and also buying in the expertise that they need to manage their website content. So that is, I forget the exact term, but it's, you know, it's a digital support that's there for businesses. So that area going forward, I would see as very important in terms of providing all those supports to small businesses. And this week we actually have the third webinar that's coming up on Thursday. I have distributed links to about 6 or 8 chambers across the county. And I know I had emailed to Gerald the other day, the one for, there's a cyber security aspect to it. This will be coming up next Thursday. So the first element deals with cyber security. And that is obviously stemming from the amount of work that's been done remotely, the amount of businesses that are relying on link-ups of members through Teams, through Zoom, through those types of platforms. But I suppose we rely pretty much on Teams to connect internally, our organisation. And in terms of us delivering training, our learners across the board, really, we try and set them up on Teams and, you know, connect up with them remotely. We actually have 2 cookery courses running through Mayo Abbey at the moment, if you can imagine that, being done remotely. They started on the 25th, 26th of June, 8-week programs. Now, the first week she had to spend on linking up with the learners, inducting them, making sure they were set up and comfortable with using Teams. So then this week's content was actually getting down to the practical side of it, launching into the cookery, doing the practical side, videoing it and sharing that content with the learners, and then obviously interacting with them on Teams as well. So, you know, it's just interesting, as I said, when you've had to be inventive and creative about your model of delivery, you know, it's just interesting the kind of things that can be rolled out, and there's actually great demand for it, and there's great feedback so far from the people that are engaging. So it's lovely to see that sort of thing happening. Now, the other types of things, I suppose, across the board, we would have always historically been good at delivering IT training, you know, in terms of Microsoft programs like Word, Excel, that type of thing. So little courses in Excel spreadsheets, maybe that can be done remotely. Again, I have a model for an 8-week course that we could look at doing, you know, and delivering online. And again, there are challenges to us. Obviously, it's not the same as walking into the normal classroom environment, and the interaction with the tutor, the personal interaction is gone for the learners. That's what our people, I suppose, miss for the most part, the learners, you know, the personal touch to the training, you know. But look, we'd be hoping down the road, we will get back to the centres in September. It's going to be a totally changed environment. At the moment, there is a plan, a safety audit being done up in terms of how we can safely return to the centres. We're getting outside guidance on it, and of course the Department of Education has a lot of say in it. But what I would be seeing as happening is, previously if you had a class of 8 learners on site at the Further Edge building in Castlebar in the room, we'd possibly only have 4 spread out around the room. The rest will be at home on Teams. Possibly the following week we'd rotate the learners. You know, so it's going to be a very changed environment going forward, unfortunately. But look at, you know, as I said, we just have to get on with it, accept the change, and try and implement things across the board as best we can. But there's a lot of good courses on offer there, from the basics, you know, the introductory level courses. We deliver all the way up to level 6 QQI certified courses. Skills for work would be more the basic level 3, level 4, up to, you know, Excel and things like that at level 4. Then we can go onwards higher level. Now, there are other good programs that can be delivered and will be delivered down the road, the kind of MOS certified training that would be in programs like Word, Excel, that type of thing. But again, a lot of that, it'll be a bit of blended training in the sense that there'll be a bit of classroom and there'll be a lot of self-directed learning by individuals themselves from their homes or whenever they, you know, they can complete the learning themselves, the classes. But then at the end of the day, they'll have to do the exams at a test centre. So as I said, that will be managed going forward. Now, John, I'm sorry, I'm aware of time and I don't want to, you know, spend too much time beating around the bush. So literally, the key things that we can take from this going forward is it is going to be a changed environment as regards training. There's going to be blended aspect to it. There's going to be, you know, a bit of classroom linked with a bit of remote delivery. And as I said, that's no harm, you know, across the board. Everybody has had to face up to the new challenge and just get on with it. So both the tutors and the learners. So has been across the board training, I suppose, really on Teams, and it will be going forward. And incidentally, this actually, the new webinar that's coming up on Thursday, sorry, I didn't finish that point. The first aspect of it on Thursday is to do with cybersecurity. Then there are planned dates following on from that. On the 16th and 18th of June will be actual Teams training. And Teams training from the point of view for the usage that Martin would have mentioned there, in terms of companies, managers being able to manage their staff remotely and interact and conduct meetings and do all that sort of stuff remotely, that people would have a good command of the use of Teams. So that links it in with the cyber aspect as well, and protecting data and protecting, you know, security of systems while people are working remotely, which is all very important. So then, as I said, I did mention we need a roadmap going forward. I mean, things are a bit changed, so we will be getting direction on that. And obviously, you know, as I said, the distancing and the way people are limited in terms of, you know, the amount of people we can have on site in the centres at any one time is going to be an issue, and we will get guidance on that going forward. But I suppose I wasn't as prepared as the other two speakers, and apologies, I hadn't all my PowerPoints done in advance.
Oh, it's perfect.
But what I can do, what I will do, John, I'll go back to the drawing board I'll do up a list of some courses, a table, and I will email it to you afterwards.
Perfect.
So that if any of the businesses want that information, that content, and what we can actually do and what we will do, you know, it will be listed. And there's great programs there. There's even a level 6 program that's being promoted at the moment through the training centres. It's a leadership and management program. It's actually City and Guilds content, but it'll equate to a level 6 QQI certified program in leadership and management. So again, good for skilling up some of the team leaders, the internal managers, you know, in production or whatever. Great scope for development of staff. And that's what we are all about, is development of staff. The one thing that has been highlighted to us recently is we're, in terms of going forward, we're going to be under pressure. The training organisations across the board, the ETBs across the country, as you can imagine, are going to be under serious pressure. I mean, you know, we're looking at something like 25–26% unemployment at the moment, that we hope when it stabilises off will go back to around 10%, something like that. But we're back to the 2008, 2009 and worse than that scenario, where we had to set up what we called activation programs to actually engage the unemployed, get them back into courses and looking at planning, you know, career preparation planning courses, and looking at new training, new areas that people could possibly go into if they just couldn't go back to their own sector. You know, and there is a possibility in that. I mean, construction was the wave that was hit in 2008, 2009. But as you mentioned there, I mean, hospitality is on its knees at the moment. The retail sector is pretty badly hit, and construction as well. So we've a big area that's been hit, you know, so we have a lot of engagement with staff to do and support for employers. So look at, as I said, I do welcome, you know, suggestions from employers. If employers have ideas for other little courses that we could do, supports for them, by all means come forward to me and we look at courses. We're in the business of looking at designing courses from having engaged with people. And I mean, the service on the ground is to support the individuals and the businesses, you know, so we really do want to engage properly and provide courses that are meaningful and beneficial for people going forward.
Perfect, Geraldine. Thanks very much for that. Really appreciate it. And like I said, we're very lucky to have the ETB here in Castlebar. And you know, you're evolving like businesses. You're changing with the times, and it's a scary time out there. You know, from HR this week to health and safety last week, everything's changing, and we just have to change with it, unfortunately. And I do think as business people, we are very versatile, and we have to be. Like I said, next week we're going to have all things business. We're going to talk about sales, business development, and all this week's presentations and last week's presentations will be available if you email us at thechamber@castlebar.ie. So I'm going to hand you over to Anne Conlon. I think she might have a couple of questions. Anne, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks me and John. Fantastic feedback actually to our speakers Clodagh and to Martin in relation to the HR, and just to, I know we're caught on time, so I'm just going to just mention a few things. First of all, Clodagh, to yourself, the must for what employees must have and should have and shall have. That's a very interesting point. Some people have come back with, and also the leave for holidays, and Martin I know has brought that up as well. But there's two short questions I'm just going to ask you here. I think you might have answered one for me, and that is, Clodagh, employees on temporary layoff receiving cover payment, will holiday entitlements for that time be lost with the employee reducing their annual leave?
Yes, because holidays are for time worked. So if the time isn't worked, they're not accruing it. So going into, we say from the 12th of March, I might have had a holiday, a week's holidays or 10 days. Obviously I hold that, but I'm not accruing on a month by month basis if I've been out for the last 3 months. But there's an exception to that. In a layoff, you're entitled to your bank holidays for the first 13 weeks of a layoff. So that I would be accumulating my bank holiday. I'll get a day off or be paid for that in the future. But I'm not accruing the annual leave. But as I said, it could be that you would, when somebody comes back, you'd be extraordinarily busy, and they could hit a situation it's unlikely, but they could hit a situation where they'd have 1,365 hours worked in the year, and that would give them their statutory minimum as well to annual leave.
Okay, thanks, Clodagh. And yeah, also answers the other question in relation to the bank holiday as well. I'd like to go maybe to Martin, if that's okay. So I have two questions and a few comments for you, Martin. The first question is, I suppose people are interested in the level of cooperation from your team in relation to these culture changes. What has it been like for you in Baxter?
Yeah, overall, it's been fantastic. As I said, with very large numbers, but overall, we've managed to do things as a group that we wouldn't have thought possible last January or February, and done at an incredible pace across very, very large numbers of people. So overall, I must say the cooperation has been excellent. Now, there's a lot of realists on this phone call, so I guess even in the land of saints and scholars, you may have an occasional sinner. So I'm not saying that everything in here has been perfect over the last 3 months. I think you're all around too long to think that's the case, but that's very much the minority. Absolutely the minority. Overall, people have been really, really, really helpful, and I'll include Situ in that, because I think they all recognise the patients we have to serve, but they all recognise that we're all in this together. We either do this well together, or we do it very poorly together, and I think everyone understands the outcomes of that. And just on that, I'd say communication to people. What are we doing? Clarity of message, and the trouble to explain to them why we're doing it. What are the outcomes? Vast majority of people are fully on board. I always look at these things as an opportunity to increase engagement. We've seen a couple of tough times over the years, and each time I think if you manage it right, you come out as a group much stronger. So it's an opportunity as well. Good overall, good.
Okay, brilliant. And I suppose really what I'm hearing from that is the culture change that's been made within Baxter. It's showing really strong leadership and really strong communications, and really well done on that. And that leads me kind of into my second question. Before I mentioned that, one of the comments I got was cash is no longer king. You were saying it's all contactless with the cards. So that was a comment that we're usually hearing about. And also the great idea about the contact log in relation to the employees. And also it was a good idea to have buddy systems, I suppose, with the remote teams that are working together, just in case one of the employees go down, your risk is for vulnerability is less. So I suppose coming back to the culture change, and that is one of the questions I want to ask is, you know, I suppose when we look at culture change, we look about celebrating the milestones. So has Baxter thought about how you might celebrate these milestones which you've achieved during this time afterwards?
I think what we've tried to do is recognise a few particular milestones. So for example, we'd always be working on maybe new product introductions. So we've hit a few nice milestones there, which we were concerned about. So we've recognised them internally. We're using sort of video clips in the canteen of patients that we're sourcing externally again to recognise. For example, for about 22 days there, we chartered planes leaving either Dublin or Frankfurt into New York. So we tried to use video clips from patients or from the market back to people to say, yes, that's got to where it's delivered, and thanks to all of our new employees and the things we've done on certain shifts. But on a large scale, I think, to be perfectly honest, we need to sit down when the storm has calmed a little bit more to see what sort of will there be a sort of a marquee event or recognition. I think that's something we'll probably look at towards the end of the year on a larger scale. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank the three speakers, Geraldine, Martin and Clodagh. There's been great chat coming into me privately in questions. So I apologise if I've missed anything, but I'll hand you back to John. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. And I'd like to also thank Anne for her help in today's seminar. It's been very good. And I just want to finally thank Ger as well, help with all the IT, and Bernard Hughes, the Connacht Telegraph, for promotion as well. We're working in the chamber. We met the council today just to see what's possible for businesses if they need help. We have done a survey, and we're going through the survey now to go back to the council and see what businesses are actually looking for, how we can help them. And like I said, there is lots of help out there, and people just need to ask. We need to help one another. Like I'm on the phone every day to other businesses, even in my sector, and looking like at the release of the requirements yesterday for the restaurants and cafes. It is tough. There is an HR requirements. It is tough, but we have to learn. We have to move on. And like I think Martin says, agility is a very important part of this. So I'd like to wrap up today, and I'd like to invite everyone same time next Wednesday at 3 o'clock. It'll be all things business, and I'll be looking forward to that. I'd like to thank Clodagh, Martin and Geraldine for today, for very informative, I have to say, and practical tips for getting back to business. And thank you for everyone else for attending. And like I says, all the video presentations from today and last week will be up. Just email us on the chamber at chamber@castlebar.ie. Thanks very much, folks. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
John,
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.